Okay, so first I wanted to do a little bit of a like a where are we now type of thing to just kind of summarize where we've come so we have an idea of where we're going with things. So I'll do a new whiteboard. Okay, so our first topic were points of attention. This is obviously a good place to start with this practice because everything is dependent on a point of attention. Attention can be, and this is gonna sound really fast, so maybe you go and you listen to the replay. I'll slow down a little bit. So attention is the mind's ability to isolate aspects of its sensory experience. And I'm going to put in parentheses voluntarily or involuntarily while ignoring others, either actively or passively ignoring other aspects of the available sensory experience. That's what attention is. So it's basically like a slice of the pie, or it's a flashlight shining on a section of the wall at any given moment. That's what attention is. Points of attention is using that dynamic and focusing and concentrating on something specific. Does that make sense? Point of attention. The next topic was IPA, intending our points of attention in advance. So this is basically saying that, okay, now we know what a point of attention is. We know what attention is. We know what we're basically doing. And now we need to come up with these points of attention in advance, like before I go into the office or when I wake up in the morning or, you know, as I'm sitting down on the couch to watch TV. These points of attention will be intended in advance. And Shayna, let me know if I mess up the order. Sometimes when I'm numbering things, I mix them up. Donna, did you have a comment? I just noticed you unmuted.
Nope.
Okay. Um, what was our third topic, Shayna? Do you remember? So, oh yeah, I think I just went out and described what the four directions are. And that is internal, external, breath, and cognition attention. So we have four different directions. Didn't go into great detail about those, but because we have plenty of opportunity to go into greater detail coming up. That's kind of what some of the topics coming up are really about, and setting that up. Well, and then we have the declaration. And I hope I didn't forget one. So if Shayna is here, she could double check, like video or topic wise, and make sure I haven't missed one here.
You have
But
one that's maintaining breath.
no, that we haven't had
Oh,
that
I'm
as
sorry. That was the warrior training class. I'm sorry.
yeah, that's a different thing. Yeah, we're nowhere, these topics are nowhere near maintaining breath. So point of attention, IPA, four directions, the declaration, and the declaration is, well, you could even write it down. So like you could even write it on a note card, and you have your four directions written out, maybe with a couple backups. That's a form of declaration, right? You could say it to yourself out loud. You could tell your reliability buddy. You could write it, on your arm. Here I am, stuff like that. So you can make a declaration in a variety of ways. This isn't like a super rigid, you got to do it one way type of thing, but a declaration has some intention, and we could talk about it, and I could tell you whether that is a valid declaration of your intentional point in advance, and it's going to reflect one of your four directions. So, do these topics make sense? And
It
you
makes
know,
sense.
yeah,
Basically, it might help to give an example of what an internal and external point of attention so that
Definitely. Yeah, we will. Yeah, so actually, once we get done with this bare bones, I'm imagining somebody going back and then, just putting these bare bone pieces together. Otherwise, it's really difficult to talk about any of this without these, because I don't think these phrases, the way that we're using them, I don't think they're used this way in any other setting. So, yeah. But definitely, that's what we'll spend a lot of time doing is giving examples. That's the bulk, ultimately, that's what we would talk about the most is giving examples, not only of points of attention in the four directions, which is actually that's actually what we talk about today, incidentally, but that's actually what we'll continue to talk about. That's what we talk about in group study and things like that, you know. But yeah, so the declaration leads to what I call the toolbox. And this is an essential aspect of the practice because I feel like if you don't have this, you're just not setting yourself up to move through these different directions of attention. And then I'm gonna put three very important words: establish, elongate, and maintain. And maintain doesn't mean indefinitely. I mean, come on. But maintain could mean all day, a vast majority of the day. And maintain implies with fewer interruptions. And so that's what we're looking to do with our points of attention. We're looking to establish, elongate, and maintain the points of attention within these four directions. And then that's where the toolbox comes in. So I'll give you a visual. So I'm going to draw four directions. And then I'm going to put four boxes. The four boxes, this could be my toolbox. And inside of my toolbox, well, that's exactly what Donna's talking about. That's examples of where we're putting our attention. And then, of course, we have to talk about examples until we're blue in the face, because, I mean, that's the only real way that we can learn this practice is by sharing actual examples and experiences. Otherwise, we're just passing on information, and that can be useful sometimes, but it's not nearly as useful as sharing experience and how we've worked with things ourselves. So I'm going to start with external, and then on the opposite, I put internal. And then over here, we have the breathing mechanism. And then over here, we have the groovy category of cognition. Now, the toolbox is to identify specific, deliberate, voluntary points of attention that you are intending in advance within these four directions that you will eventually declare as a part of your moment. So, some examples. Now, I could give you examples. I'll let you guys decide, but I could give you examples now of what I do with these four directions because it's changed. Of course, it's changed. Or I can give you examples of what I did maybe in 2010 or 2015 at the movie theater. Or no, 2016, I was moving on to Long's barbecue restaurant. So from the movie theater to the barbecue restaurant to a variety of different things after that. But Shayna says start from the beginning. Okay. Well, can't start from the very beginning because it took decades to put this together. These realizations, it's like they happen and then they have absolutely no bearing on your life for the next 3 years. So I had a lot of these like balance, just attention itself being something more than what people were talking about. It's like nobody talks about attention, but yet we talk about attention all the time. It's like, give me your attention. May I have your attention? Pay attention. And it's like, and people would ask me, well, where was your attention? And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I've never really talked about attention in school. I never really was given ideas on how to improve my concentration or improve awareness of myself. Self-regulation, what's that? Like I was born in 1979 though, so these are likely topics in schools today, especially in certain demographic, like certain cities. These will be topics, not in others, of course, but yeah, when I was growing up, nobody told me anything. Also this is psychology. Like this is a subject that is not super debatable, like this is established. I'm giving you the definition of attention. We're talking about sensory perception. This isn't mystical in nature. Nothing wrong with mystical in nature, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about attention. And that's very focused, concentration. These are words that we use every single day. Well, maybe not every day, but they're words that we're very familiar with. So the toolbox is basically giving yourself a chance, an increased probability to have points of attention that you're aware of, right? Because that's ultimately what we want to do. We often use the term active, like is our practice active? But basically means, are we doing it? Do we have a point of attention? If Donna fell from the sky and said, Ida, where is your mind? Like right now, what was your point of attention that you've intended in advance that you have declared? And there is probably going to be an answer, right? There's probably going to be something relative to the situation that Ida is in that moment, relative to the surroundings, because she's been doing this for a while. So she knows that not every setting is going to have the exact same, 4 directions of attention. We have to modulate and we have to do different things depending on the scenario. But I'm almost positive that at any given moment, if I dropped out of the sky and said, Ida, where is your mind? What's your point of attention? She's going to be able to tell me. Because I bet that she would probably have a point of attention active for most of the day. Internal or external, breath or cognition. Okay, so we're basically creating 4 functional groups of points of attention. So when I first started this, way back, I really liked geometry. Oh boy, I had to pull that out of the, whew, that's old school. I'm going to do that today just for fun, instead of the inclusive vision, which does reveal geometry, but it's not as if I have declared geometry as my point of attention. It does reveal it when I'm doing an inclusive vision, but okay. So geometry, what I started to look at in my exterior point of attention. So that's my category. That's my functional group, exterior. In the exterior category, I would focus on the geometry of the world and I would name it. Do I do this now? Absolutely. Definitely not naming it. I definitely don't need to name stuff, but Shayna said start from the beginning. Because when I first started this practice, I was anxious. I didn't feel very good. My body was completely out of whack. I wasn't in any sort of balance whatsoever, really. I had a ton of information in my brain. Boy, if you asked me about some stuff, I could tell you about some stuff. But if you ask me to give you personal examples of executing mindfulness meditation and all of that woo-woo, I would have no examples. Not really. I'd be like, well, no, don't really have a lot of examples. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? This is crossing the divide between theory and application, between talking about something and doing something. But this practice is doing something that's active. So I guess that's a way of starting at the beginning. I'll just do that one, but I would pay attention to like windows. They take on certain shapes. I noticed that nature doesn't have a lot of straight lines. There are. I consider the horizon to be very natural, and it's not straight, but there's also kind of straight. Something just to notice, in the world. So I noticed a lot of things. Things were revealed to me. I had an opportunity to learn and grow, and it introduced a lot of self-awareness. But that visual, external point of attention, and I say visual because geometry is, I'm doing that with my eyes. If I close my eyes, geometry gone. But so external points of attention, I'll give another one real quick because it just came to mind. This is one that I still do that I like a lot. And because the air conditioner changed, it reminds me that I listen behind me. I got that from Tai Chi. It's like, why the hell would you do that, Ernest? I don't know. Well, I do now. But at the time, I had no idea. I just did it because it required something from me. Active attention. That's the only reason. And Jerry and I's famous phrase, wherever your mind is the least normally, put it there the most on purpose. So I don't normally listen behind me. Why the hell? Why would I? Of course, now I know that increases spatial awareness. And when I'm in a city such as Chicago, it is really good to have a little bit of awareness of what's going on behind you. People like to pick your pockets. People like to, I don't want to say they like to, but there's a lot of dysfunction in the city when you get around a lot of people. The more people there is some, in Chinese medicine, we would call it a severe Shen disturbance. Jerry got listening behind from Lizzie. There you go. So those are external points of attention. Those two things are in my toolbox. Do you see what I mean? If I was given a worksheet, which is something I'm going to work on, I'm going to have a little worksheet. So it's like, here's your 4 directions. Write down some of your points of attention. They can be lowest hanging fruit, as Donna has mentioned, like things that are a little bit more easy for you to remember. You know, we don't have to start at the most challenging thing in the world. I remember I was in the dispensary and one of the security guards, you know, we were talking about this very subject and I was like, the water cooler. How often do you pay attention to the water cooler? He's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, why would I pay? I'm a security guard. Like, that doesn't make sense. Why would I do that? I was like, well, give it a small portion of your attention while doing everything else. While you're in that room that you're in, which is just a little room because he had to guard the door. It's a cannabis dispensary, so you got to be super security. Pay attention to that water cooler. And of course he couldn't. And he's like, Ernest, I don't understand. I can't do this. Like, if you're asking me something so very simple and I can do it until anything starts to move around. And I was just like, practice more. And of course he practiced more. And then what was the result? He said he could focus on his job better. He could recognize anomalies quicker. He said he felt like focusing on something just a little bit in the background helped him create a more 360-degree awareness of the room that he was in. And as a security guard, that makes him better at his job. It also makes him less likely to get distracted and talk to employees about things that he really shouldn't be talking about because your job is to be the guard of security, not everybody's best friend, chit chat and all. You know, you don't have to be all like super, you know, like those guards in front of like Buckingham Palace. If I have that correct, you know, that they're not supposed to talk to people. I'm sorry, Ida, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But the people that you're not, you know, they just say nothing. Ida, Lauren, I'm sorry. Culturally, that was a mess. I have no idea. All right, other directions. So we have internal. In the beginning, I started with Tai Chi because, again, I was using Tai Chi to fill in the blanks of Don Juan. Don Juan was giving me all of the things I needed to really say, okay, I got to do something. And then Tai Chi was what I would do because I needed things more tangible, you know, than going on long walks in the desert and, you know, taking peyote and jumping off of cliffs with my friends, you know. Actually, I don't think those people were Carlos's friends, but I digress. So the internal direction of attention for me were points on my body. And one reason I chose these points is because it seemed to be consistent across cultures, such as the area around the navel seems to have consistent traits in cultures that are separated by space and time, such as and I'm going to be very general, but like confidence and physical. When you're doing something that requires more physical exertion, paying attention to that area can help you achieve the energy and power necessary to match that physical exertion or you know what is necessary for that physical exertion. So, you know, that's one way that I began. with paying attention to my body. And then I started walking in what I would call a very deliberate way. So I would start paying attention to my feet as I walk. Am I going heel to toe? When I stop at a stop sign, are my knees bent or am I locking my knees? When I'm walking, do my hips feel like they're free to move or am I walking, too stiff for some unknown reason? Am I compensating? Like, does there seem to be pain? And now I'm compensating in my body. And not necessarily trying to change and fix everything, but just using it as data. That was also one of my mantras back in the day. Is like, I don't have to judge this. It's just more data. I'm just taking in more data from around me, and that's what my brain likes to do. It's going to reflect entropy, and it's going to try to organize the data and put it in a comfortable box so that it doesn't have to be afraid of the data. Because if the mind can't categorize it, it tends to be afraid of what it can't put in a category. That is, and I'm just talking about dynamics of the human brain. Any questions so far in those first two directions I've given? And so any questions? These are tools in my toolbox. Listening behind me is a tool in my external direction, right? Paying attention to certain areas inside of my body, that's a tool in my toolbox of internal points of attention. Now, let's say I have a really tight stomach and it feels like someone's like twisting at my small intestines. Do I want to put a lot of Dantian attention? Like, I mean the navel area, my belly? Is that where I want to put ultra laser like focus internally? Mm, no, no, I'm not trying to ignore pain necessarily because it's a messenger, but I also don't want to focus on it, enlarge it, and make it worse. That sounds stupid. So that's the reason that we have the toolbox, is so that, that whole paying attention to my dantian while my guts feel like they're twisting isn't the best. So I'm going to focus on, I'm going to give you one that I would focus on now. So it's a little bit more state of the art. I don't know. Wei Qi, Qi that exists as your defense on the outside of your body. You know what's really ironic is that I used to believe this as a kid. Like this was one of my, if I look back on it now, it was a form of self-regulation to feel safe. I would imagine that I had this energy barrier. Of course, the blanket was also an energy barrier. And I could just put, in Chinese medicine, your blanket at night, along with socks, act as an energy barrier to ward off external pathogens because Wei Qi goes inside to replenish. When you sleep, yin replenishes yang, yang replenishes yin, and that's what they're describing when you sleep. So even the blanket is a form of energy protection. And I always believed that as a kid. It's very interesting that Chinese medicine would view it that way as well. Well, anyway, so if my tummy hurts, I can pay attention to this thin little layer outside of my body that feels light, and with some breath regulation, it can feel smooth. And does it really make my tummy not hurt? No, but I'm taking the focus off of it, so it's not highlighting it. It's not driving it worse. So I'm not denying, I'm not pretending, I'm not trying to control, but I'm just being deliberate with my mind and strengthening my defenses. And then you'd be surprised how much the tummy ache might even go away, or go away quicker, or at least you're maximizing a situation that we wouldn't ever sign up for. Like, you know what I mean? Like we can call things whatever we want if words are important. Some people don't like the word challenge, difficulty. Okay, whatever. But it's an area that you wouldn't sign up for, right? If someone at the beginning of the day said, who wants to sign up for a pleasant, relaxing day where you feel vibrant and alive, or tummy ache, where it feels like somebody is twisting at your guts? So you can call it whatever you want, but that's not a preferred state. And I'm calling an apple an apple. Any questions? Okay, so breath. I have, and this is what we'll talk about more on Sunday. I have a toolbox of breath techniques. Now, some of these breath techniques reflect the 5 modes. So when I'm standing, I have certain techniques. That's a toolbox of breath. That's like a toolbox inside of a toolbox. So I have breath techniques as one toolbox. And then I have breath techniques when I'm standing. I have breath techniques when I'm sitting. I have breath techniques when I'm laying down. And there tends to be some consistency in these toolboxes. I add some every now and then, but we want balance. We don't want a toolbox that's so oversaturated with stuff that we forget, but we also don't want it too narrow that we don't have the diversity to adapt to everyday situations as they occur. That's an important point. So when I'm sitting, when I'm standing, when I'm walking and moving, I have very particular points of attention on my breath. Like even the breath direction has so many different things I can do with it. That's why I call it a toolbox. So for example, when I'm going upstairs with those big, 5-gallon water jugs, I have a particular breath technique that I feel like helps me physically get up those darn stairs. That's physical exertion. And I have 5 more to go, and I have to take them not only in the apartment, but I have to put them away. Or Shayna does, either way. So that would be a different breath technique than when I'm just sitting down and reading. But both are in my toolbox. And because they're in my toolbox, I can change and switch and move around as much as I need to based on what the moment is presenting. I think that's a really fun way of looking at the universe. How is it presenting? How am I presenting? I'm not a big fan, although let me preface with I absolutely respect when people do, but I personally just don't identify a lot to aspects of myself. I like to identify to the totality, which is actually something that you can't really, it's everything. So if you start identifying with everything, some could say now you're not really identifying with anything. That's an interesting circle to talk around in sometime. But I have my breath direction with tools in my toolbox. And I would say, though, one of the most important is the one that I saved for last. It's also the one that has the most interference in it, and that's the cognition direction. That toolbox has to be set up. That toolbox, it's very important, even if you need a pencil and paper in the beginning to write that shit down and organize it. What are you doing with your mind? Are you using your imagination? Are you deliberately intending particular words? Like me, are you focusing on a particular subject that you need to study? Because I have a shit ton of studying to do. I don't want my mind wandering. I have to stay focused. And I still give it breaks, because I understand the value of rest. So it's not like I'm trying to nonstop. I studied yesterday for 5 hours and took an hour break. So balance. Okay. Now, the cognition direction is going to include words. I highly recommend it including, like it's superimposed imagination. That's in my toolbox. And then there's a tool inside of a tool. So the tool is superimposed imagination. That is almost like a category in itself. And under that would be all of the different things that I do with my imagination. And I do a lot. That's a very robust category for me because it was for the ancients as well. And what does that imagination do? It helps to elicit a type of feeling. Is the feeling imagination? Absolutely not. If you're perceiving it, it is chemical in nature. So you have created a chemical something. I still would concede, based on the evidence that I have, that when we are perceiving the infinite, that very, very fine layer of the moment, it's still being perceived chemically. Like it's still a part of our chemical perception. Like where energy is being perceived, just like light and sound and taste and touch. The subtle is, we have subtle receptors, I guess you could say. Although that statement is not, I don't know where they are. Maybe it's in my pituitary, I have no idea. I think it's just the entire conglomeration of the body, really, that acts as that, put it all together, and now it's like, you got something really big, and that's the human being. Oh, we really underestimate what the human being is. If we had a better understanding, this is contradictions in the forest of humanity. If we really took the time to appreciate what we are and hold that in our cognition direction of attention, we would have to reassess the way that we spend our moment. Of course, this group probably already is and has, and etc. And it's not necessarily a judgment thing, because I'm not going to talk about any one thing, but it really just has to do with, I think Don Juan would say it, and I guess that's a warrior training way of putting it, but he would say, you're in this marvelous life, like this marvelous world, where every aspect of it is amazing. The more that you learn about biology, when you start to learn about the cell, and not just the cell, but like how everything is working together in the body in a way that is just beyond imagination. I don't think, we have to dive into it and discover it. I'm not so sure that we would have ever just intuited that the body and everything around us, on a molecular level, on an atomic level, on a quantum level, is just so, it's simply complex, right? Yin and yang, it's both. It expresses itself in what would seem as very complex ways, but also the smaller you get, the more you start to see the simplicity and the principles, such as yin and yang. It's like, this is such an important principle that I see in the cell, that I see in the atom. Electronegativity, like, what are we talking about? How food becomes us. This is the input-output principle. It doesn't make sense to, okay, I hear Shana in the back of my mind. Ernest, input-output principle. I'm going to write that down because it's super important. Input-output principle. It's such a great way of looking at the human experience, and it's helpful, especially in this practice, to understand and understanding the input-output principle is understanding yin yang. And I don't mean it like just understanding that these two things are opposites. That's not yin yang theory, not just that. How do these opposites interact? How are they really just the same one thing? That's more reflective of yin yang principle and how deep it goes. It's not just the symbol of exact opposites. And in fact, it's not a symbol. Like, the symbol is just trying to visually represent the deep and profound concept that we can see in absolutely everything in nature. Everything, every phenomenon that we can have, that we can experience, has the principle of yin yang embedded in it, or it doesn't exist outside of the human mind that created it, and therefore it may not be subject to yin yang principle, other than it's just a fabricated concept, such as evil and good. But again, topic for another day. So, toolbox. I really diversified the cognition toolbox because it's my brain. I spend so much time there. Now, where I spend most of, in the beginning, I spent most of my cognition toolbox with deliberate self-talk, productive self-dialogue. I had to talk to myself a lot. because I was so used to talking to myself, I couldn't just turn it off like a switch. So I used my words to help reinforce my practice. And it was the practice that interrupts the interference, which is internal self-talk all of the time. Donna says in the beginning, she simplified her toolbox. I still do. Yeah, I still do. I think it's very diverse. And I do think that as simple as it is, it will still be different in circumstances that maybe I've never been in. Like I've never been on a cruise ship. Probably will never go on a cruise. It's not my thing. But I might, I don't know. I've never been on the ocean on a huge ship like that. So maybe I would need to go back into that less simplified toolbox and see what I got in there. But on a day-to-day basis, my toolbox, I'm much like Donna. I want it to be very simple because the more simple it is, the more I can remember. My primary external point of attention is a type of vision technique that I do. It's a practice that interrupts. So from the time that a person wakes up, from a time that a person goes to bed, they are either talking or out loud, or they're talking in their own brain, which we would call internal dialogue, internal monologue, self-talk. That runs 365 days, sometimes for decades, with only moments of interruption. Does that make sense? That's the human condition in general. Are there exceptions? Here we are. The word thinking to people can mean a lot of different things, apparently. So I'm being very specific. Internal self-talk. Talking to yourself. Sometimes people view imagination as a form of thinking, or like reason and deduction and logic as a form of thinking. My dog can infer. So I put all of that now in cognition. And so the word thinking, the way that I would probably use it casually, Santina, means internal self-talk. It's using the exact same part of your brain that I'm using right now to talk out loud. So I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna say, Ernest walked up the mountain. I'm gonna do it in my brain. I did it. And I use the exact same part of my brain as if I say Ernest walked up the mountain. There's a little bit extra that's causing it to come out of my mouth, of course, but the impetus, the area of the brain is exactly the same. So when I say interrupt, I mean interrupt that. That's a form of interference because that's the cognition direction of attention it's way out of balance. So you can also look at these four directions as we're looking to balance them because and this is again, this topic is starting to get further down the line, but ultimately we want a balance in those four directions. The human being in general, all over the world, the cognition direction of attention is way imbalanced. It is overcharged, it has too much energy, and it's overacting and disrupting all of the other aspects of our life. So and the stream of internal self-talk, as Donna points out, becomes habitual, it becomes repetitive, and oftentimes it's not even beneficial to the organism to be doing it. And so now it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. It's like,
I didn't believe, I didn't buy that necessarily. I thought I had, I,
whoops, you muted yourself. So, and I think you
until
were still there.
until I started practicing, and then I noticed the stream of dialogue, because it was such a challenge to interrupt it, um, was evidence to me that it was habitual and repetitive. I wasn't actually choosing to think about um, the dialogue that I had going on in my head, and I hadn't noticed it was habitual and repetitive until I attempted this practice. And I had to do something different with my cognition, it was a challenge because the momentum was so strong. And I recognized just in the process of being aware, where is my mind? And what was I saying to myself? That it was habitual and repetitive. And in just a dialogue, my narration of my life was constant. I was constantly narrating everything, how I felt about it, judging it, labeling, all that stuff. I wasn't aware of it until I started. I wasn't aware that it was habitual and repetitive until I started this practice. So it absolutely interrupted that.
And the reason that I isolated habitual and repetitive is, and then also not making you feel like, we could say feel well, feel inspired, feel better directionally, where is this going? But the reason that works so well is because logically, you cannot tell me why I need to think the same thoughts in the same order all the time, why I need to respond in such a habitual way. How is that benefiting me? Doesn't have it imply that I'm well below the threshold of active recognition and I'm just acting anatomically. I'm just acting based on habit, like my dog does, and like, other life forms do that aren't necessarily self-aware. So yeah, that is where our next topic will go. And I have saved the best for last because it is what makes this practice. Like, you cannot remove redirection. But redirection becomes more tangible if we have a toolbox. Do you see how I'm kind of hopefully trying to put this together logically for somebody? Well, somebody would watch these videos and just get the nuts and bolts. Like, I'm not even trying to, this isn't convincing. Like, I'm not convincing anybody of anything. I'm not trying to campaign. I'm just giving the nuts and bolts of the practice that if you take these elements away, I don't know what you're doing. You're doing something that's maybe similar to the four directions practice, but that's not it. And that's okay. It'll probably still benefit you. I'm not going to get mad that somebody is doing the practice differently. They're like, Ernest, I never intend my points in advance. They just come to me. Okay. Okay. What do you think about that? I think okay. I think good luck. I've done this for a very long time, and I think that not intending them in advance is a mistake. And it will probably be in my section called Common Errors. But do unto you as you want to do. I have nothing to say other than good luck. So there's a reason that these elements are essential. Don't have a toolbox? Okay. What's your plan, Stan? Like, life is life. It's not always this, Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I don't know what I believed before because I started to put this together. I don't know what I believed. I believed just, I even remember when I first realized, and I've told you guys this one before, but like when I realized that my thoughts aren't just inside of my brain, like somehow the shit going on inside of my mind matters. Because there was this debate at the time, like with video games. Does video games influence society? No, it doesn't. 10, 20 years later, we have a gun epidemic all over the country. It's like, I wonder if that contributed at all. I wonder if our willingness to find violence entertaining has anything to do with our willingness to find violence an option to resolve things going on in our life. Now, I'm not saying that that's cause and effect. I'm just saying, like, is there a correlation? There's something, there's something to that. I don't know what. I would need to study it, and I'm not making any claims, but I think that I would want to study that. That sounds interesting. All right. Any questions about the toolbox? Does it feel like you can start to put, if you haven't already, or at least organizing it, does this feel like it can help organize your practice? If it's organized, you can remember it. If you can remember it, you can make sure that you're actually doing it. And a lot of these things are in place because I've worked with people and they think that they're doing the practice until they are in a one-on-one with me. And then we really start talking about it and they're like, oh shit, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not doing what you're saying. And I'm like, I know. So I put this together with a lot of that in mind. I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of one-on-one. So when I talk about common errors, not intending your point in advance, not being situational, these type of things are the most common errors. But if you take into account these essential elements, I don't see how a person could go wrong, right? So I have my point of attention. Cool. I have intended my points in advance. Let's see, I'll go back to my whiteboard because it should still be there. Yeah. So I have my points of attention. I've intended my points in advance. My intended points in advance reflect the 4 directions. Got it. I'm declaring it in some way. Maybe I have a journal and I'm writing down in my journal the points of attention that I'm really going to play with today. That's a form of declaration. I don't recommend that being your only one. I do recommend, and we're going to get into declaration even more with redirection. Redirection will encompass all of this. All of these elements are necessary for redirection. And redirection is the only way, and I'm going to say this with the camera on. Redirection is the only way to elongate and maintain this practice. It's not the only way to establish it. There can be a variety of ways of establishing it. I still think that the best way of establishing it is with redirection if necessary, right? Because why do you need to establish it? Because you've lost it, and that's okay, because reestablishing is a part of the redirection process. And as Donna would be sure to say, that's a win. That's a big thing when we remember that we have forgotten, because the moment we remember, we're back. Like we have an opportunity again to put our attention back into the directions that we have intended in advance, that we have plucked from our toolbox. And that is a part of this whole process. But as far as I'm concerned, for me, redirection is the difference maker. So that's the difference in everything that I have ever been introduced to in terms of the mind and in terms of bettering my life and in terms of self-help and wellness and yada, yada. Redirection is the most important aspect. Without that, I have nothing. I have an intermittent practice at best. I have a practice that I do sometimes. I have a practice that I actually forget most of the time. I have a practice that I get benefit from sometimes only when I remember to do it, which isn't all that much. And then so I'm not learning as much. I'm not growing as much because there's less self-awareness, because where is my mind? I don't even know. It's all over the place. It's thinking hungry thoughts because my tummy rumbled. So what am I going to do for the next until I get food? I'm going to think about food. Like, why would I do that? I already know I'm hungry. I know what that means. I don't need to sit here and think about food. Because what happens? It makes you hungrier. And that's a principle too, Okay, so that's it. That's that, and that leads to redirection. Once we have redirection, I think you have all of the elements necessary to do a practice. But you can't take any away and it still be this practice.